Today, we're going to see the swankiest soul crib around. And I introduce you to our narrator, Barack.
Thank you, Corey. All right, so just a bit of a recap. We left our heroes last time as Aidan turned into a werewolf. Apparently through interaction with the talisman that was broken, and the new ability for Nael, or by Nael, to be able to guide souls, and she guided what apparently was something that felt like a soul out of the talisman and merged it with Aidan, allowed him to transform into a werewolf and beat the historic werewolf that we have been dealing with from the beginning of the story. They were making haste towards Coranta City in order to figure something out. We'll answer the question of what in a second. And we back in Lavatown. Solace is still there. We just last left her when something happened to her. She got to the crystal, something happened. She landed on the beach, barely alive, was saved by Rajiv, taken to the church, and Lomek, who has been in bed, unable to, was unconscious, was woken by her, but then apparently is completely mortified by her, so he can't even talk when she's around. He's just babbling incoherently, totally terrified of her. And she had that last dream of what happened to her as she touched the crystal, which involved her making a psychic trip to San Francisco, seeing the Eye of Sauron on the Salesforce Tower. Do you remember that scene? And being apparently punched out of the crystal just before she touched it by Lomek in her envisioning. And she also saw that the crack in the crystal, and she saw the word shame. If you recall, that was sort of the last thing that she saw as she was dreaming about it. All right, and we are going to finish Act 2 today. I'm going to read through the good old charade method, and we are starting today on Act 2, Chapter 25, the Soul Crib. We'll head straight to the Royal College, Enriel said as they approached the south gate. Garrett was riding on Aidan's back, clearly enjoying himself. Mom, you never actually told us why we're coming here, other than letting things cool down in Lavatown. Nael sent a withering look at Garrett, who snorted at her little rhyme. But we didn't have to go all the way to the city to do that. We need to see Zafina, Enriel responded matter-of-factly. The adept? Why? Nael was surprised. Just trust me. There is something I want to show her. Oh, good day to you, my good man, she said the last bit to the guard who greeted them at the city gate. The guard's eyes locked on Aidan. A wolf? Yes, Garrett responded enthusiastically. He's my pet and I love him so much. The guard raised an eyebrow as Aidan growled under his breath. Nael couldn't hide her smile. Hey, he's our pet, not just yours, she said. Fine, Garrett leaned down and wrapped his hands around Aidan's neck, but I'm the only one who can ride him. Aidan shook vigorously, in the process throwing a grinning Garrett to the ground. The guard sighed, then turned to Enriel. There's been recent rumors of a werewolf, so we're being a little careful. He pointed at a sign posted behind him. These are the rules, but what they basically say is keep to yourself and don't cause a bother, and you'll be all right. It's 1 silver apiece to enter. He gestured at a jacket with its embroidered front-runner symbol. Do you know your way around? Enriel handed him the money and nodded. Yes, we're familiar. All right, then. Go ahead and do yourselves a favor. Watch the wolf. People can get skittish, the guard said and turned back to his post. It was mid-morning by the time they arrived at the Royal College. Nael was struck again by the magnificence of the building. I wonder if they have more of his writings, she found herself thinking. I'd like to visit the library here someday. Enriel faced no trouble gaining entry. She was well recognized in some circles following more than a decade of attending social functions as a frentenga. Even so, Nael noted admiringly that all it took was for her mother to flash a smile at most anyone and they would respond favorably. I know so little about you, Mom, she thought, and felt embarrassed. I hope you'll tell us more once this is all over. They had to wait for Zafina to become available. The guard offered to escort them inside, but they preferred to enjoy the serenity of the meticulously maintained college gardens. The morning sunlight gave everything an otherworldly feel, and they joked that they couldn't tell which world it was. Aidan stayed quiet so as not to cause alarm were he to be overheard speaking, but he did force Garrett to walk. Garrett, in turn, stuck his tongue out at him before giving him a hug. Even in wolf form, Aidan was taller than the gnome, and they found themselves laughing at the strangely comical gesture. Eventually, they were shown to Zephina's office. Just as messy as the last time, Nael noted to herself. So many guests, Zephina jumped off her chair and rushed over. Oh, and look, a werewolf. What's your name, werewolf? She inquired. Aidan, he said hesitantly. But how did you know? I've stayed silent the whole time to make sure everybody thought I was just a household wolf. It's all in the eyes, Zephina nodded vigorously. And if you're here and not eating everybody, then it's easy to conjecture that you were taken as an adult. Elf or half-elf, I'm guessing? Anyway, it doesn't happen very often. You must have some resistance to the dire toxin. Mind if I take a sample of your blood? Aidan shook his head. No need. How I became a werewolf was not the usual way. Zephina cocked her head at him. Not the usual way? Now, that's extremely interesting. You weren't bit by a direwolf? It's a long story, Zephina, and we'll be delighted to share it with you afterwards, but please, at this moment, we need your assistance, Enriel intervened. Right. Zephina turned to Enriel. Sorry about that. A friend of mine was doing a deep dive into Waring, right where you came from, actually, in Lavatown. He left a bunch of notes with me before he disappeared a while back. He's the one who positively identified the mechanism through which Waring occurs and the link to the dire critters. Very interesting. Was his name Carrot, by any chance? Garrett asked. Why, yes. Do you know him? Aidan and I met him recently, Garrett grinned. Oh, that's just excellent news, Zephina clasped her hands in joy. I was so worried that he ended up doing something silly, like getting himself bit in order to check his theories. He's such a clever one, Carrot, but not very careful. Yeah, I can assure you he is still both of these things. You must tell him to come visit me, Zephina said enthusiastically. His theory seems right on the money. I've spent a bunch of time trying to poke holes in it, and I have some ideas about how we can go about proving it. Oh, I don't think that will be necessary, Garrett chuckled. From all we could tell, he's proven it pretty conclusively. Even better news, Zephina turned to Enriel again. So, what did you bring me? Enriel pulled out an ornate skull case. I've had this since... She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. Since soon after the Battle of Stonebridge. The rest of them gasped. It's written in that strange language. I know you're the only one who truly understands it. English? Zephina looked up at her. Enriel nodded. I believe so. It was written by Zacharias. I kept it, but... She took another deep breath. Never mentioned it to anyone. She lowered her eyes. Please be careful with it. He told me it was an important finding he made before he left. Zephina respectfully accepted the scroll case. Wow, all the way to the wars, huh? She inspected the case. Is it preserved by magic? I think so. I opened it a couple of times in the first 100 years, just to look at his writing. The parchment looks fresh, Enriel said quietly. All right then, Zephina turned and strode towards a corner desk. Give me a couple of hours and I'll get this translated. They were sitting in the lobby when Zephina came to invite them back into her office. She had arranged chairs and a rug for Aidan to lie on. Then she climbed on a stool, cleared her throat, and started reading aloud. The Soul Crib by Zacharias. When we came upon the peninsula, it was immediately clear to us that it was protected by a god. And not just any god. The divinations were clear that this was done by no less than Excuse, the supreme deity, the one sometimes known as X. After Kenzer found a way for us to travel past the stone barrier and through the flesh-eating fog, we delved deep into the volcano, and there we discovered a huge crystal, the Soul Crib itself. I have written much about how it was made from materials both exotic and unknown, and of its unusual abilities such as transforming metal, and also of its purpose as a container of souls, not a prison, but a safe house. Here I note my latest discovery, and the one most important. With this knowledge, Kenzer is going to attempt the ascension, and as I guide him, my own soul will be lost in the process. I write this in foreign tongue, one that we have intimated from walking the soul bridge, in the assurance that it would not be casually understood except by an inquirer of sufficient skill and mental acuity. Let me therefore lay bare my conjectures and my theory. The crib has been here for a long time. My best guess is 40, perhaps 50,000 years, long before the humanoid races came to populate the world of Corantha. There are 3 souls contained within. 2 of them are of mortal creatures, the nature of which I cannot establish with certainty. When I attempt to infer from the echoes of their resonance their prior material form, they appear to my mind as reptilian. It is made extremely difficult to gain a better understanding, as they are primarily asleep, suspended in an eternal dream, and protected by the soul crib. The third is not like the other 2. It is not asleep, and is slightly aware of its presence, but only barely. It exists in the crib for a singular purpose, and it has been given just enough of a spark to fulfill that purpose, but no more. This soul is perhaps surprisingly immortal in nature, but it is not quite a god. Having considered this at length, I propose that it is a celestial. The question remains, why should it be in the crib with the others? What is that purpose? Which leads me to the reason for its existence. Here, I stand on less firm ground, and my conclusions cannot be easily verified, except by taking on the journey with Kinzer. Let me then explain my theory. This third being is a guardian. It was placed in the crib by X to ensure that the other 2 remained dormant. Like a cloth covering, it is not aware of its purpose, only of its need to exist, and yet its very existence protects the contents of the crib. I sometimes wonder what terrible thing the poor, immortal creature must have done to deserve this punishment, to lose its agency and its place in the heavens, but the ways of the gods are not for mortals to question. All 3 souls are fed by the energy of the crib, and from all I can tell, this can continue for millions of years without trouble, for the crib has 2 unique properties. First, it is so dense and made of materials so exotic that its energy might even exceed that of the sun. Second, the soul bridge attached hanging off its edge traverses many worlds, and thus it feeds from both the magma underneath it and across the soul bridge, and all of this energy keeping it intact. I shudder to think of what would happen should the crib break. It likely will collapse under its own weight, and will then destroy the world and all the worlds connected to it via the soul bridge by pulling them onto itself. Which must be why X has commanded the Guardian to inhabit it. As long as the Guardian remains within, such horrible damage cannot accrue, for its presence will ensure that the crib stays smooth. And why should the most powerful of deities go to so much trouble? Now I arrive at the most fanciful aspect of my theory. If I am right, then Kenza will ascend, and I shall be able to satisfy myself that I was correct. If I am wrong, then we shall both be extinguished forever from this and all the worlds. Either way, in your diligence by reading this essay, you will have an important clue in your possession that I, sadly, cannot have. Like Kenzer, these 2 mortal souls were aiming to travel to Celestia. But unlike Kenzer, they were battling each other, and in this, they failed themselves. Perhaps they needed a soul mage, or perhaps neither was ready to accept the need for one to lead, the other to follow. I judge by the sheer power inherent in this remarkable device, the soul crib, that X judged them worthy of the attempt, but that they perhaps were about to destroy each other with their arrogance. And so, X chose to not be wasteful and let the issue rest for a moment. The gods do not share our sense of time, and maybe X has simply not yet decided how to deal with the matter. And so there they shall live until he turns his mind to them again. This conclusion is supported by all the facts that I have gathered. Both Kenzer and I are preparing to stake our very souls on it. Oh, wow, Garrett whispered softly. Are you all right, Mom? Nael asked. And Riel, whose cheeks were covered in tears, nodded. Yes, she said, it's just that it has been so long. She sighed deeply and wiped her face. Zach was a truly remarkable person. But this is surely a fantastic discovery, Zefina shouted. I know you will want this back, she said as she handed the scroll case back to Enriel, but I am going to keep a copy I made for my records, all right? Enriel nodded quietly. Nael broke the silence. She was pointing at a painting sitting on Zefina's desk, depicting the gnome standing inside her lab. Wait a second. This looks like... She pulled out the portrait of her mother and Gino Frentenga. It looks like this. Do you know how they are made? They look so real, she said and handed it to the adept. Zefina took a quick look at it. Yes, it's called a paintography, and this is a paintograph, she responded before handing it back. The School of Wizardry spent decades working on it before coming up with the right process. The idea came a long while ago through a wild mage who traveled on the Soul Bridge. The Magic Corps can make them now. They charge a fair amount to get one done, but it has recently become fashionable amongst the big trading houses to have them made. I just got this one, and I didn't have to pay for it, she beamed at them. Then, as realization dawned on her, Zefina looked at Enriel and said, but you should know this, right? Since you're in it? Before she could answer, Aidan pawed at the floor. Did you feel that? They all looked at him in surprise. A second later, a slight tremor shook the building. Whoa, what was that? Garrett exclaimed. Didn't you tell us that this happens when the volcano erupts? Niall looked towards Athena. Yes, but it should not be happening again this soon. The adept ran over and rummaged through a pile of papers, then picked one and held it up. Best estimate is that the next suboceanic eruption should occur 70 to 120 years from now. Shouts could be heard outside. Come with me, Zephina said and started running. They followed her to a spiraling staircase and climbed it as quickly as they could, joining along with other people from all over the college. Eventually, they emerged at the top of one of the towers and ran to the guardrail. Zephina pushed through the crowd, climbed on a shallow stone bench, and shouted, Look! In the distance, right where Lavatown was, the clouds were shining in the color of magic. Uh-oh, Garrett said to no one in particular. Should we head back now? Act 2, Chapter 26. Crisis. Henriel commandeered a front-runner fast wagon that had just arrived from the south. As soon as he realized who his passengers were, the driver, a fellow named Mutel, was visibly awed and did all he could to make her happy, even if it meant letting the wolf, which clearly made him nervous, sit in the back of his wagon. The horses were also skittish about Aidan, but calmed down after Niall spoke softly to each of them in turn. What did you say to them? Do you speak horse now? Garrett asked after the wagon started moving. Not really, but I do speak soul. I found their fear, calmed it down, and encouraged them. Now that I know what to look for, souls are easier to locate, at least when it comes to animals. They don't hide them like we do. There just isn't that much background noise, Niall responded. Aidan whispered so as not to alert the driver. That truly is remarkable, sister. I am very grateful that you figured it out when you did. We wouldn't be here otherwise. I am too, Niall said, then looked at Henriel. Mom, what do you think is going on? Henriel, whose eyes were closed, did not answer. She was holding the scroll case in her lap. Mom? Sighing, Henriel opened her eyes. I'm sorry. His voice came through so clearly in his writing. I still miss him and Kenzer greatly, she sighed again. When I last came looking for you, I felt them, she hesitated. That's why I couldn't find my way in the tunnels, Nai. It was such a shock to my system that when I suddenly felt their presence, I lost myself in it. Niall squeezed her mother's hand. You mean when Lomek found you? Henriel nodded. Wait, Garrett said. That's when Lomek said he got his calling, right? That same afternoon? They turned to look at him. Well, his calling came from Thor, didn't it? Henriel nodded again. Yes, you're right. Thor blessed him, and because I have had such a strong connection to Thor, I felt his presence in the moment. I was so deeply grateful for it, but you see how it really was unexpected. I didn't understand then what had happened, or maybe I wasn't ready to acknowledge it, but I do now. Huh. That's pretty cool, being touched by a god like that, Garrett said enviously. Or in your case, just being touched, Aidan growled. In accordance with Adriel's instructions, Mutel rode as fast as the wagon would go. They reached the trail's most forward overnight stop at dusk. It was a small area, somewhat secluded from the other spots, and not in frequent use. Along the way, they noted several caravans that seemed to have stopped and reverted direction back towards Corantha City. As they were setting camp, Mutel seemed nervous, smelling the air. What is wrong, my good man? Henriel asked him. It feels like a storm, he responded. We left without delay, milady, and so I do not know what to think. With your permission, I should like to go and speak to one of the drivers over there. He pointed towards the light from the nearest campsite. She nodded, and he jumped on a horse and rode away quickly. He came back some time later. The news is not good, ma'am. There are rumors of a stone storm that began this morning and has not abated since, he said uncomfortably. I've never heard of such an event. The storms are fierce but brief. They last but an hour at most. I find it difficult to believe, as did the driver over there, but it seems like some captains had turned back already as a result. They looked at each other. I mean, if it's true, I wonder if it could be related to the phenomenon we saw, Garrett said, then added for Mutel's benefit. From the tower in the college, the clouds over Lavatown were shining. Mutel stared at him. I never heard of anything like that either, he said. Should we go back? No, Henriel said. We will continue forward in the morning and assess the situation when we get there. We really must make it into Lavatown quickly, hopefully by tomorrow night. Of course, ma'am. I shall take my leave now then. Must be well rested for the morn. It will be stressful. Then looking at Aidan, he said, I suppose it's good that you have your wolf. I heard of werewolf sightings around here recently. We're in the most vulnerable spot on the trail. Garrett chuckled. No worries about that, Mutel. My pet here can take on anyone, even a werewolf, he exclaimed. Niall rolled his eyes and Aidan bared his fangs as the driver turned away, muttering under his breath. They were on their way at the crack of dawn. In a couple of hours, Mutel slowed down and turned back to them. This seems to confirm it. There are no wagons leaving camp on their way into the city, which means none made it through the yesterday. He gestured to the empty campsites they were passing. What should I do, milady? He asked. Henrielle thought for a moment. Do continue. Maybe the storm has quieted by now. The driver nodded. If so, then it will be a mighty awful backup on the other side, he muttered as he urged the horses to pick their pace up again. It was not to be. As they turned the final corner on the trail leading to Stonebridge, they saw it. The horses stopped and whinnied, and Mutel turned and said, Some sight this is, ain't it? Shall we turn back? This is a fast wagon, and you're a light load. If I press the horses, we can be by the city gates right after nightfall. The wind wasn't very strong where they were at the top of the hill. Ahead of them, past the fence and toll booths, about halfway down towards the spasm, they could see where the storm started to pick up, as constant eddies built and died down quickly, tossing around small stones and clumps of dirt. But it was the spasm and Stonebridge itself that drew their attention. The scene was at once both terrifying and majestic. The waters of the spasm seemed to be swirling at least 100 feet above ground, yet somehow remained over the chasm and the bridge as if constrained by invisible walls. And in the swirling waters, they could see them, the boulders flying, some of them so big that their wagons seemed small by comparison. The stones somehow stayed over the spasm, and ever so often, one of them would hammer Stonebridge. Whoa, Garrett gasped. That's awesome. A huge boulder struck the side of the bridge. The sound of the crash reached them, a wave that washed over them in anger, followed a moment later by the ground under the wagon shaking slightly. The horses neighed, and only Mutel's expert handling kept them from bolting. He looked at Henrielle. Ma'am, we have to go. Henrielle shook her head. No. We shall disembark here. You go back to Carantha City, my good man. She gestured for the rest to step off the wagon and reached into her jacket, handing him something. Show this to your captain back in the city. It's a commendation. The driver stared at her in astonishment. Are you sure? He asked, and she smiled. Yes, ma'am, as you wish, he said, then turned the horses and rode away. So what now? Niall asked. Let's at least get as near as we can, Henrielle said. They exchanged glances, and sensing their discomfort, she looked back at them. Remember, I was here at the edge of exactly this kind of storm before, only fiercer, and there was no bridge then. Oh, right, Garrett muttered, with Kenzer and Zacharias. Henrielle was already walking briskly towards the gate, where a single guard standing within the open door of the toll booth was staring at them in disbelief. They stood at the edge of the wind. It should be howling, yet it isn't, Niall said. I've been trying to understand why. Another huge boulder hit the bridge, and they waited for the tremor to pass. It's a divine storm, not a regular one, Henrielle said. All the stone storms since Kenzer undid the barrier have been weak, minor reflections of the original, like the chasm itself retained a fragment of its initial purpose to safeguard the soul crib, and occasionally a memory would discharge for all time's sake. But this feels like that original barrier, and if so, something caused it to come back, something serious. So what do we do now? It's not like any of us are wild mages or ready for ascension, Aidan said, his ears flapping in the wind. Even in wolf form, this thing scares the hell out of me. I don't know, Henrielle turned towards them. I just wanted to be near it again. There is a special feeling that comes from being so close to the divine, she said, almost wistfully. The only sounds were those of the wind and the stones. Look, Garrett pointed towards Stonebridge. They followed his gaze. A small magical aura slowly became visible. It was small and fuzzy at first. As it got nearer to the edge of the bridge, it grew, and eventually it took a roughly humanoid shape, which surrounded somebody, a very, very tall woman. She was walking calmly towards them. It's Solace, Garrett shouted. It took Solace a couple of minutes, but eventually she stepped out of the wind. Hey, you guys, I was wondering if you were going to come by, she said casually. Was going to go look for you in the city. Is that Aidan? She asked, pointing. Did you get bit by a direwolf? Yes, it's me, Aidan replied. And no, it's a long story. We'll tell you later. Solace looked at Henrielle. And who might you be? She asked. My mom, Niall said. And well, his too, she said, pointing at Aidan, who responded with a wolfish grin. Solis raised an eyebrow. Where's Lomek? Niall asked. With his father. He's sick, Solis said, and Niall's face fell. Excuse me, Garrett shouted. How did you just come through this insanity? He gestured at the chaos in front of them. Oh, that, Solis turned and looked back at the stone storm. I was pondering how to make it through, and it just came to me, honestly. Think of it as a parallel ethereal pathway across Stonebridge. I've been learning, and my power has been growing, a lot. I have much to tell you too, but let's do it on the other side, okay? We really need to get back to Lava Town. We can't go through that, Niall exclaimed. Oh, don't worry, just stay close to me, Solis responded. Nothing will hurt you as long as you're inside my bubble. It will mostly feel like a normal crossing to you. When they emerged on the other side and ignoring the frenzy they caused, Enriel again commandeered the front-runner passenger wagon from one of the many queuing and waiting for the storm to abate. The two merchants that had rented the wagon protested, but once they realized who she was, they happily accepted the quadruple fee refund and her promise of a favor. After boarding, Enriel impressed upon the driver the need for them to ride without stopping for the night. By the time they caught each other up, it was dusk and Lava Town was still a few hours away. So what's with the shining clouds? Garrett was asking. Is it from the underwater crystal? It has to be, Solis responded. It's leaking magic. That's why everything in, around, and over Lava Town has this glow. I can feel it everywhere. I have been able to experiment so much in such a short time. It has also roused the monsters from the deep shallows. The militia has been busy fending them off in the tunnels. The lieutenant had called in everyone to the shallows for the effort. They set up base at the docks, took it over entirely. The Steadfast and the Lassie too. Oh, and the church. All of them? That's like 1,000 people, Garrett whistled. Nearly all. All routes in and out of the city except the main tunnel are closed, and they are keeping a skeleton crew in critical areas. The stairway is still open too, but nobody cares. I'm still amazed that you managed to get so close to the crystal, Enriel said quietly. When Kay and Zach did it, they said only a very special and very powerful kind of wild mage could even try. When they took me down to see it from a fair distance, I could sense it trying to repel me. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, almost like being punched in the gut. Solis stared at her. Punched in the gut? Yes, Enriel looked back at her. Why? Is that important? It might be, Solis said. When I got near, it's how I felt before I blacked out. I've been replaying that moment in my mind a lot. It seemed like everything was going fine, and then suddenly the crystal decided that... Here she paused for a while and her cheeks blushed. I wasn't ready, so it rejected me. That sounds a lot like being repelled, Niall said. Other than Lomek delivering the punch, which can't be literally true, did you notice anything else when it happened, she asked. Solis sat back. Well, I didn't think it was very important until just now, she said. The last thing I saw was a small crack on the surface. It wasn't large, a couple of feet or so, but it did look out of place. You think that's what's causing all the trouble? Garrett piped up. A few seconds passed with Solis in deep thought before speaking in a grave tone. It might be, and if so, then I suspect that the world is about to end. They all looked at her in shock. Think about it, she continued. It all makes sense now. Remember my puzzle dream I told you about? When I got near the crystal, I think I saw them, the souls that are trapped inside of it, and I'm sure those were the people from my dream. It also fits with the description of the soul crib you just told me about. But the thing is, she paused. Yes, Enriel prompted her. There were only 2 souls inside of it, not 3. And if the one that's missing is the Guardian, then according to Zacharias, the entire thing will collapse onto itself and destroy the world, Niall finished the sentence. Multiple worlds, Garrett said enthusiastically. Solis looked at him in distaste, then nodded before continuing. If the Guardian is gone, then the magic may be leaking through the crack I saw, which might also explain why the mountain is waking up and the divine stone barrier is back. Maybe the crack is how the Guardian escaped. How much time do you think we have left, Solis? Aidan said quietly. Solis shuddered. I have no idea, but this is starting to feel like a serious crisis, and I can't imagine we have very long. So how do we find this Guardian, or another one for that matter? Niall asked, but nobody had an answer. Act 2, Chapter 27, Revelations 5. The magical glow that surrounded the mountain provided a strange illumination at night, and as the light from the moons Kuri and Ani filtered through it, they splintered unnaturally. Even standing a mile away at the main tunnel entrance, they could see the many buildings that dotted the mountainside seemingly surrounded with a dim red aura, and any torches being carried shining with a blue flame. Inside the tunnel itself, the glow emanated off the walls, interacting with lantern lights in crazy patterns, resulting in colors mixing and bouncing off of each other. It was mesmerizing. The slight tremors that shook the mountain every couple of hours also made it disorienting. When they arrived at Trade Bay, Henrielle told them that she had to go back to her official duties. She hugged Niall and Aidan goodbye, then patted Garrett on the head absent-mindedly, causing him to giggle. She shook Solis's hand. "Go figure this out," she said, and turned towards her kids. "I know that I will see you again." Then she left, and they headed down to the shallows. On the way, Aidan transformed spontaneously back into his humanoid form. It only took a few seconds, and luckily happened in a quiet moment when no one else saw it take place. "Looks like I know when my 3 days are now," he commented casually afterwards. Oddly, the clothing and other items he had on him when he became a werewolf reappeared following the transformation. The Shallows docks were completely overrun by the Lavatown militia. It was a madhouse of activity, and they quickly agreed to head towards the Church of Tranquility. When they got there, it was full of injured soldiers. Once they finally managed to convince the officer in charge to let them through and found Rajiv, he looked unusually haggard. "I've been treating them so they can go back down to the front lines," he said. "Frey has stayed with me, but I can feel her irritation with my constant requests. It is not pleasant," he sighed before adding, "Can't take care of the homeless either." "Is the situation really that bad?" Niall asked. "It seems that way, dear child. The deep monsters are relentless. I keep telling the officers that it sounds like they are afraid of something and are simply trying to escape, but they won't listen to me," he sighed again. "Soon enough, I fear that I will no longer be able to heal them. What will happen next? What will happen then?" "Can't Lormic help?" Aidan asked. "He can heal. We saw him do it." "He could and he would were he able, but he is in a state," Rajiv answered. "They are granting me the small courtesy of allowing me one room with privacy, and that's where I keep him." "What's wrong with him?" "I wish I knew, for I could fix it. He seems normal, except always very tired. He eats very little and cannot bring himself out the door. And," he looked up at Solis, "when she is near, he panics." 2 more soldiers were carried through the door on makeshift stretchers. "Excuse me, I have to go tend to them," he said, squaring his shoulders, and left hurriedly. Solis looked at them and shrugged her shoulders. "I have no idea," she said. "When I woke up here, he was still stuck in that nightmare, and it seemed like my voice snapped him out of it, but now he's scared of me. It's all very strange." "Wait a second," Aidan said. "Didn't we establish that your souls are somehow linked together?" "We did?" Solis seemed confused. "Yes. When you were down there by yourself, Rajiv did some sort of divination and told us they were connected, but he couldn't understand it. Your souls were connected," Aidan said, and looked meaningfully at Niall. "Right, I remember his words now," Niall responded. "He actually said that Lormic's soul was intertwined with somebody else's, and we assumed it had to be yours, Solis." "Why?" Solis asked. "Because he's been feeling you like a ghost limb," Niall said softly. Solis looked at her with genuine surprise. "It's why we guessed you were arrested even before we found out for sure. Lormic sensed it when they muzzled you. He collapsed when it happened. We never discussed it with you before because, well, it was pretty awkward." "Oh," Solis said. She said next to the altar. "So he wasn't just being weird then." Niall shook her head. "I guess it could also explain why I saw him punching me out of the crystal," Solis said quietly. "Do you think you could figure it out, Niall?" Aidan said. "I can always try. Solis, are you okay with me doing my thing, my new thing?" Niall looked at the wild mage whose hands were shaking slightly in her lap. Solis nodded. Niall moved next to the room where they knew Lormic was staying, opened the door slightly, and looked inside. They heard her soft whisper projected towards them across the crowded room. "Looks like he's asleep." Then she leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes. A couple of minutes later, she was back to huddle. "Sorry it took longer than I thought," she said. "I know what to look for, but it was much easier with Lormic since he was the only one in the room. Here," she gestured at the room inside, "so many souls reflecting their vessel's agony." "Vessels?" Aidan asked. "Yes, right. I guess that's how it comes across to me now. Souls are tied to the body like a bird in a custom-made cage. The body is a container. It keeps the soul happy and fed, and each body is tied to one soul. Am I making sense? That's also how, say, a soul spark can live in an object like with that talisman. The object is the dedicated vessel, but then the soul imbues it with awareness." "Wait, hold on. Are you saying the talisman was alive?" Aidan gasped. "I didn't quite catch that before." "After a fashion, yes," Niall responded. "I can't explain it better. Zacharias did it in his book, and even I couldn't understand it until recently, let alone teach it." She turned to Solis. "Anyway, I can tell that there is some connection between the two of you, but..." She hesitated. "But what?" Solis asked. "It's complicated." I can see the link, but it looks off, like the two of you are dancing around each other rather than being tied together. I don't understand it. And then, she paused again, then I can also see that your soul is connected elsewhere. Elsewhere? Yes, I tried to follow it, but I couldn't. I was blocked by something. Garrett, who had kept quiet until now, spoke up. Nai, he ducked under Nael's hand as she tried to slap him for using her childhood nickname. Okay, Nael, he laughed. But seriously, you're saying that you can literally say that the soul of Solace is connected to Lomax, but not exactly, and then to something else, but you can't say where it goes? That's about the size of it, Nael responded. No wonder she's so messed up, Garrett exclaimed as he pointed at Solace. I'm dizzy just hearing about it. Just as he said it, the mountain shook again. They decided to rest until dawn. Solace stayed outside in the main room to keep away from Lomax. She claimed that she didn't need much sleep anyway. The ambient magic was apparently sustaining her in some fashion. Her discomfort was evident. Rajiv came with them into the room to take a nap, palpably exhausted. He slept on a small cot at the foot of Lomax's bed. When he got up, Aidan, whose body was still adjusting to being a werewolf and who had not slept at all, could see just how much the man had aged. Aidan also noted that, just like his elven eyes allowed him clearer vision than he would otherwise have in his wolf form, so did his wolfen eyes give him the ability to see in the dark when he was in his elven form. After Rajiv left, he prepared a simple breakfast for the others. Good morning, Lomax said as they were finishing their meager repast. Lomax, Garrett jumped on the bed and gave him a long hug. The rest of them came over. Nael held Lomax's hand and he smiled warmly. We have so much to tell you, she said. Wow, that's quite a story, he said appreciatively an hour later when they were done. Hard to wrap my head around it. He looked at Aidan. Are you really a werewolf now, he asked. Aidan nodded. Yes, but because of the way I became one, I think I'm also a little different than the typical werewolf. But I'm not sure how yet, except I seem to be able to carry all my stuff with me when I'm in my other form. It somehow just comes back when I turn elven. Well, for one thing, I'd have expected that you might be able to control the transitions, Lomax said simply. Aidan stared at him. Wait, you hadn't thought about it? Lomax was surprised. If you got your wearing capability from a magical source, the talisman, which was imbued with it by a wizard, then it seems like the whole thing would be more orderly than with the disease, no? It's how divine magic works, in a sense. If you know how to ask for it, and the god deems you worthy, then it happens, but it isn't predictable. But with the wizard, I'd instead expect the power to be structured and to come from within. Have you tried it? A few seconds passed in shocked silence. Then Aidan closed his eyes. They looked at him as he seemed to go into a trance. A little later, his image grew fuzzy, surrounded by an aura that quickly turned too bright to see through. Then it dissipated, and Wolf Aidan stood there instead. Well, I'll be, he said, and wagged his tail before changing back. I just realized that my transformation last night wasn't spontaneous at all. I did it subconsciously because we were heading down here, and I didn't want to scare people. He smiled. Now that I know how to do it, I'm in full control. Thank you, buddy, he said to Lomax. Lomax laughed. You're welcome, I suppose, although it seemed pretty obvious. He looked back at Nael. How's my dad doing? He asked. She shook her head. Not so great, Meg. He looks utterly spent. I need to help him, Lomax tried to rise but fell back down. He looked deeply embarrassed. I don't know what's happening to me. I feel fine, but when I try to move, my muscles feel like they're stuck. He sighed deeply. How do you mean stuck? Nael asked. Like I'm being held down somehow, or maybe a better way to describe it is I don't want to get up, he said. It's very hard to explain. Like the ghost gleam, Garrett whispered. I wonder if they're connected somehow. What did you say? Nael turned to him. Just that I wonder if these two things are connected. You know, Lomax being able to sense, Garrett looked furtively at Lomax for a second before resuming, her when she's gone and him feeling held down right now. Nael didn't say anything. You know, because he's afraid of her, he added in a way of explanation. Nael seemed to go into a trance. Oh, it's her turn now, is it? Garrett murmured. Opening her eyes a little while later, Nael smiled. That was very clever, Garrett, she said. I've discovered something. What? Lomax asked. Is it going to help me get out of this bed? Maybe, Nael said and turned to the others. Remember how I told you that I saw Lomax and Solace? She made sure to hold Lomax's hand tight as fear came into his eyes. Souls were intertwined, but not exactly. That they were dancing around each other. What Garrett said gave me a different perspective, and I saw it. Meg, your soul is not afraid of Solace. It's trying to leave your body, which is probably why you're so lethargic. Her soul is defending itself. From what? Lomax asked in exasperation. From your soul taking over her body, Nael answered. Oh, Aidan whispered, like what we saw near the campfire. Yes, I think it was already happening then, Nael nodded. It's not everything I saw either. She stopped to rearrange her thoughts. Now that I could figure out what the dance meant, the rest of it came into place. I still can't see where the other side goes, but for a flicker, it looked like Solis wanted it to happen. At that moment, Rajiv opened the door holding a steaming mug. Is he awake? He asked. Oh, good. Here, son, drink this. It should allow you to move around a little. You can control your transitions? Rajiv asked Aidan a few minutes later, after they quickly filled him in. Yes, Aidan responded. Then, my boy, may I suggest that you volunteer to help these poor soldiers? In your wolf form, that is. Those monsters are still coming strong, and unless we clear a path for them to the outside, which nobody wants to hear, we need to hold the lines or we will be overrun. I hadn't thought of that, Aidan said. Yes, of course. Why don't I come with you? Nael rushed over and hugged Aidan closely. Stay safe, brother, she whispered as her fingers brushed his scar. I can't stand to lose you. Aidan stepped back and wiped a tear off her cheek. Don't worry, sis, I'll be fine. If I could handle the other werewolf, I can handle some monsters from the deep, he smiled affectionately. You all have the bigger job anyway. Then he and Rajiv turned and left the room. Lomek got off the bed carefully. I need to go and clean myself, he smiled awkwardly, and, he hesitated, I think I can be next to her now. Solis. As he said the name, he shuddered visibly. He looked at Nael. Somehow when you told me about what you saw, it felt like something fell away in my head. I'm still afraid, but not like before. Then he slowly left the room as well, leaving Nael and Garrett behind. Nael sat down. Quite a pickle, huh? She looked at the gnome. His head was cocked to the side, almost unnaturally so. What's wrong, Garrett? Are you okay? She asked. He didn't answer. Then his eyes shifted, and she found herself irresistibly bound by them. Her entire being was transfixed by what felt like the entire world, no, bigger than that, the universe contained in his look. Multiverse, she found herself thinking calmly, even as the rest of her brain was screaming at her in downright panic. And all of time and space. She felt completely lost, without any material or spiritual boundary. Why am I not freaking out, she wondered. Then his eyes cleared, and his head relaxed. Yeah, I'm good. Totally mystifying, right? The sound of his voice gave her senses license to catch up, and she jumped out of her chair, shaking and pointing at him. What was that? She demanded. What was what? He asked in confusion. Your eyes, the thing you just did. What was it? She yelled. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you sure you're all right? He asked hesitantly. He stepped closer, and she moved quickly behind the table, keeping it between them. He stopped. You look really scared, he said. At that moment, her overwhelmed brain reached its capacity to process. Her last conscious thought before she fainted was, screw that.
Spooky.
Anything? Any questions? Any clarifications? All right.
There's some consternation between Solis and Lomek about the soul thing that I haven't seen before.
Well, it's all been hinted at, right?
Yeah.
Act 2, Chapter 28. Scatological Windmill. Chef, meat fan. Yeah, man, she just looked at me funny like she was scared of me and said I did something with my eyes. Then I asked her if she was all right and she fainted. I swear I was just standing there, Garrett pleaded. They were all present except for Aidan, who had gone to help with the monsters. Nael was laying in bed. Lomek and Solis stood on different sides of the room, avoiding each other. Garrett and Rajiv sat at the table, the latter having joined them after Garrett ran outside for help. One of you is always down for the count, Rajiv observed. Truly, I wish I understood what we were dealing with. Frigg, I'm afraid I've been asking her for a lot. My divinations, they stopped working a while ago. I can still heal physical wounds, but I don't know for how long. He sighed deeply and gestured towards the bed. It's sad. She's a sweet girl. Lomek, his face pale and his shoulders drooping, made his way over slowly and sat next to Nael. He held her hand and closed his eyes and started muttering under his breath. A shallow aura extended from his fist towards her. Then the aura faded. Lomek was breathing heavily, his chin down to his chest. Nael opened her eyes. Once the happy cheering subsided, Nael explained. So what happened was I saw Garrett's eyes change, and then it's like I lost all sense of where and when I was, like I became an insignificant part of of everything, all at once. She looked at Garrett with suspicion. Are you sure you didn't do anything? I didn't, I swear. I didn't feel anything either, he said miserably. Maybe I imagined it then, Nael said. All this soul magic stuff has been coming fast and heavy. My brain must have assembled it and expressed it in a weird fashion. Still, something good came out of it. They leaned in expectantly. While I was out, I think I figured out part of the puzzle, Nael smiled, and it's going to blow your minds. Meg, do you remember what you said about how you never had any memories from your childhood at all, not even vague ones, and how you've always felt disconnected and never felt entirely comfortable in your own vessel body? Nael asked. Lomek nodded. And all those dreams you had, wasn't there a theme? Yes, he said. I want to touch her, then she wants to kill me, then she laughs at me for dying, then I want to kill her, he recited in a flat, tired voice. With obvious effort, he lifted his gaze towards the wild mage. Sorry, Solace, it's been driving me crazy. She smiled at him. Don't worry, I've had my own crazy dreams. So anyway, Nael continued, between his dreams, the thing Aidan and I saw at camp, the divination we got from you, she nodded at Rajiv, and my own examination of the soul connections, it finally dawned on me that there is a simple explanation to all this. There is? Garrett asked in surprise. Well, not simple maybe, but straightforward. Now that I have a grasp on the bigger scope of how souls work, the answer presents itself. I wouldn't have thought of it if not for that out-of-body moment I had with Garrett, but that perspective gave me the last clue, she breathed deeply. You see, Meg, I think you were born with the wrong soul, she said quietly. In the shocked silence that followed, she seemed to think of something. Oh, and perhaps you too, Solace, although I'm less sure about that. You've never looked to me the same way he does, she concluded. I was born with the wrong soul? Lomek said weakly. Nael nodded. It explains everything, and it all fits. Your soul is anchored to your body, of course, but it's a more tenuous connection than mine or anybody else's. I initially thought that you were suffering from some terminal disease and that your soul was just trying to hold on, but I was wrong. Instead, it's trying to get away. And she paused for effect, and her eyes twinkled. For all I can tell, it wants to re-anchor into Solace. She paused again. Look, I know it sounds terrible, but I honestly feel relieved. It finally all makes sense. She leaned backwards. Relief? Lomek blurted. Are you mad? You're telling me that my soul hates me so much that it wants to leave my body and take over hers? He yelled. What does it even mean? What if I succeed? Yeah, I'd like to know that too, Solace said. What would happen to my soul? Would it go into his body? Nael sighed. I don't know the answer to these questions, he said, but it feels good to know the problem. Rajiv, who had been listening to this exchange with a dazed expression, suddenly asked, Do you believe that their souls have been transposed? Nael said, I don't know, but it's plausible. But that doesn't make sense, does it? Rajiv continued. Didn't you tell us that, he gestured at Solace, her soul was bound elsewhere too? If they were transposed, wouldn't her soul simply be connected to his body, like his soul is connected to hers? Good point, Nael murmured. I wish I could see the other place where yours is going, Solace, but I can't. It's like I'm not allowed to follow it. How do you mean exactly not allowed? Rajiv asked. It's another thing that's hard to explain, Nael said. Right now I can see everybody's souls if I focus. Generally, it's how you'd think it would be, with each soul anchored tightly to one vessel. Lomek's soul is anchored to his body, but it's a weaker link. It wishes to be elsewhere, and all the signs are pointing that the elsewhere is Solace's body. But Solace, her soul is essentially in three places all at once. It's anchored to her body, and it's intertwined with Mek's soul around his body, and it has another anchor. It's the strongest of the three, actually, but when I try to follow it, I run into a kind of wall, a spiritual soul barrier that I cannot cross. Is it on another plane? Is that why? No, Nael shook her head. I'm certain it's in Korantha, which is frustrating because I should be able to follow it all the way through once I grab a hold on the soul thread. The room fell into an awkward silence, and Rajiv took the opportunity to excuse himself as he left to tend to more injured soldiers. Soon after, Garrett spoke up. Well, I know it's not a person, but it occurs to me that there's one place around here where we know you might not be able to go, he said. The crystal. That's an incredible idea, Nael said after a little while. But it's possible, like with the talisman. Yes, it would make sense, Solace said quietly. I'm clearly connected to it in some way, even if you rejected me earlier. Was that a request for a pause? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I have not good lighting tonight.
Yes, it would make sense, Solly said quietly. I am clearly connected to it in some way, even if it rejected me earlier. But assuming that it's true, how to make sense of it? Lomek asked. Then he yawned and added, I'm really exhausted. Please forgive me. He closed his eyes and immediately started snoring softly. Nael turned to Solace. Remind me, when you were rejected, you said that you imagined Lomek was the one who pushed you out, right? Solace nodded. Nael thought for a moment. If your souls are intertwined, then maybe he's pulling you back instead? Your brain could be interpreting things it can't make sense of, like mine did with Garrett. Heck, it's even possible it's working in reverse. You can't exchange souls back with him because you're held in your body by the crystal. So I'm stuck between them? Solace wondered. I guess, Nael said. It doesn't solve the Guardian question, though, Garrett said. Remember? Oh, right, Nael looked at him. I forgot about that. A strange sound came from Solace's direction, and they turned their heads towards her. She was standing, her head almost reaching the ceiling, and smiling in a way that was both reassuring and unsettling. Her eyes were lit with magic. I know, she said. I am the Guardian. I can't believe it took us this long to figure it out, Nael laughed. Yeah, seems totally obvious now that you said it, Garrett looked at Solace. Right, she said. I'm embarrassed that I didn't connect the dots earlier. It fits perfectly, like a jigsaw. But I still don't understand what it means. Clearly, I'm not the Guardian in a physical sense. That would be absurd. For sure, Nael said, but your soul may be that of the Guardians. Then how come I don't remember anything other than my life? Like this Guardian creature was supposedly been around for thousands of years, Solace mused. Tens of thousands is more like it, Garrett said. And it is, well, you are immortal, so it could be millions of years for all we know. So how come I don't have any sense of all that time? Solace retorted. Nael spoke again. Didn't Zacharias write that the Guardian's purpose was restricted when it was put in the crystal? Your memories could have been wiped. It sounds awful, but in the context of an immortal being, maybe it isn't so bad. What does time mean to an immortal? It also said I was being punished for something horrible, Solace smiled awkwardly. But yes, I get your point. And if my memories were wiped when I was put inside the crystal, then perhaps they were wiped again when I was pushed out of it, which probably means that my existence now in this body also has an explicit purpose. I wonder what it is, and why I couldn't go back into the crystal to accomplish my original task, whatever it was. Complicated, Nael said. What's complicated? Lomek asked. They looked at him. He was yawning and rubbing his eyes. Sorry, I find it hard to stay awake, he apologized. Any ideas? Nael asked after filling him in. He returned her gaze. Actually, yes, I think so, but he sighed and squared his shoulders. All right. Let's say that Solace is the Guardian that was in the crystal and was ejected from it, most likely through the crack she saw on its surface. Solace, didn't you tell me that magic couldn't create something out of nothing? He asked. She held her thumbs up. The Guardian clearly didn't have a material form at that point. If it couldn't simply create one, then it would have needed to find one to occupy, right? Oh, Solace exclaimed. Of course, I would jump into the nearest available body. Exactly, Lomek said. So you pop out of the crystal and let's say a baby is born at that exact instant nearby. So there you go. Maybe its intended soul hasn't fully anchored to it quite yet. Does this sound like something that could happen, Nael? She also held her thumbs up. So, he continued, this means that something had to happen to that other soul. Is it possible that it too jumped ship, so to speak? That would be some domino chain, Garrett chuckled. Lomek turned towards him. But it could end with the other kind of available vessel. Remember that my dad found me lying on the beach. He thought I was dead. What if I actually did die? My body's original soul would depart and the body would start to decompose. But what if another soul occupied it at that very instant? What if it was the soul that was displaced by the Guardian? He took a deep breath. It would explain everything, wouldn't it? Why I have no memories beyond the moment my dad found me. Why I was initially behaving like a baby, even though I was already a child. This new soul had to catch up. It would explain everything, really. And it would also explain why your souls are intertwined and why yours want to anchor to her because her body should be yours. Nael finished for him. That's remarkable. Solace whispered something, but none of them could quite make it out. Did you want to add something, Solace? Nael asked. With downcast eyes, Solace took several deep breaths to calm herself. Then, in a deeply pained voice, she said, shame. Having relayed the very last bit of her dream from when she was discovered on the beach, Solace held her head in her hands. So what is supposed to happen now? Well, if you were to go back into the crystal, then I suppose that his soul could try to jump back into your body. I might even be able to help it do so. But as long as you are barred, then I don't know, Nael said. The shame that is stopping you from entering the crystal is because you failed in your task, right? Garrett asked. Solis nodded ruefully. And yet we don't know what the task is, but to figure it out, you need to find a way back into the crystal, he continued. Nobody responded. That's quite the paradox, he said. But maybe having knowledge of the paradox will allow you to back inside? It would be a pleasingly ironic way to resolve the challenge, he chuckled. Solis shrugged her shoulders. Suddenly, Garrett drew a deep, sharp breath and rushed over to her. If we succeeded, it means you'd be gone. His eyes were filled with tears as he hugged her. She hugged him back. I think you're right, she replied quietly. As if to underscore the moment, the mountain shook, longer and harder than before. The door flew open and Rajiv came inside. It's getting worse out there. The waters are starting to heat up, and there are reports of the shelves shaking as if they are trying to pry themselves off the mountain. The shaking is especially hard near the top, and the dome on the viewing platform broke an hour ago. It's been closed, but all the guards are down here. Someone found a way through and fired a shot into the council chamber where they were having an emergency meeting. I'm told he hit the prime, then jumped to his death. So, have you made any progress? If the crystal breaks and the mountain erupts, the town and everyone in it will be gone in an instant. Worse than that, we think, Nael said. Much, much worse. Rajiv looked at her questioningly and Lome came over. Dad, we are going to try and save Lava Town, but just know, even if it looks like I'm gone, I may still be here in a different way. His father looked at him, but said nothing, and Lomek hugged him deeply. I love you, Dad, he said. Rajiv hugged him back. I love you too, son. He stepped back. I have to go back, even if it's hopeless, he said and departed again. Another tremor shook the floor, and they could hear people screaming outside. They looked at each other, then Lomek asked, the beach? As everyone murmured their assent, he added, funny, if all of this is true, then it's where this all started and where it will end. It almost seems like a prophecy. There's no such thing as prophecies, silly, Garrett yelled as he ran towards the door. Come on, let's go save the worlds. That's it.
You've gotten the exchanging of souls and how it happens. This is like the first time you're delving into that.
They're just discovering it, and they don't have a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah,
because the worlds are about to end.
Right. There's a lot at stake here.
John made a connection and said there's shades of Neil Gaiman happening here.
Great. I mean, I consider that a huge honor to be compared to such a master.
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. During shades of what?
Neil Gaiman.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
Pretty much any TV show that had a concept of God in it is written by him.
Yeah. So Lucifer, right?
Yeah.
And Omens, which was fantastic, and I don't know why that got canceled.
Which one?
Or Good Omens. Good Omens with
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it might be similar concept.
Yeah.
Well,
Very different, but there are elements of like
You can hear it.
the way that souls move and
Cool.
especially with the souls moving into a dead body as the existing soul exits.
Yep.
Reminding me of a Lucifer episode.
Yeah, but they're figuring it out as they go along to some degree. They haven't actually seen this transpire yet, right?
well, so they've seen, through Nael's ability to see souls, they've seen she's relayed a lot of stuff to them, right? And this seems to be a reasonable solution. So, but they don't have much choice. Now they're going to try and save the world based on all of these assumptions.
Yeah.
And
I can see, well, I don't want to predict anything.
predict, please go ahead. I'm very curious.
I see an integration of all of them at the end.
Okay, it's interesting.
I see that kind of possibility because of some of the connections that some of the individuals have, but also as a group. But we'll see.
Well, I didn't lie to you that the little dwarven child actually did die. At
I
least
know.
with this new
But
information.
I see now that it's like a, you know, it reminded me of people who have the ability to have out of body experiences, and the folks that that talked to that say they've actually done it. There's some kind of another presence that wants to get into their body before they get back in it, and they have to hurry because then they would be in some sort of limbosity if they don't. But it sounds like, see, that's one of the things I haven't heard you talk about. What happens if somebody gets it back into their body while they're out, or something like that?
Excellent question, but we don't have time to explore it because the world is about to end.
Well, I sure hope it doesn't. Or maybe it transforms into something cooler.
Who knows what's going to happen? But this was I do. This was the end of Act 2. So this is the sort of the biggest act of the book, which is taking the heroes from being a bunch of strangers who don't know each other and don't know what they can do, and leads them all the way to becoming basically first a team, then a group of people that really care for each other. And also untangling all the mysteries, or at least most of them, and figuring out what the real threat is to the world. So that's where we are. I hope that part has been satisfying.
Yeah. One thing that my OCD-ness of accuracy, whatever, it seemed to me that when you were talking about the tumultuous waters or whatever in the chasm, you were interchanging the words spasm and chasm. Was that accurate? It's as being equal?
Well, they are essentially equal. Spasm is the way that the chasm under Stormbridge is called by the people of Lavatown. Right? You remember that dick joke from, I don't know, chapter 7 or something like that?
Yeah. So they call it, that's what they call it, spasm, because it's moving?
Well, they call it the spasm because you have a big, long peninsula with a round volcano on one end and a bunch of like white waters gushing on the other. And it's like basically they consider it some sort of dick joke, basically, that some god created.
Okay.
So that's why they named it the spasm.
Got it.
So yes, the words are interchangeable in the context of people that grew up in Lavatown. Yes. But if it's confusing, I don't know. I mean, again, that's different because you're hearing it like 3 or 4 months since we covered that. But somebody who might be reading the book might be like reading it 2 days after he encountered that paragraph, right? You know what I mean? It's
I sure do.
In your mind that the term exists.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to Sunday.
Yeah, so Sunday is going to be the end of the book. It's Act 3, an all-in-one run. And Act 3 is about as long as these 4 chapters were. So it's going to be about an hour to get through. And it's the entirety of the end of the book.
The only thing I'd like to point out is that the soul swapping is, I don't know, it gets slightly confusing. And
no kidding.
I wonder if
Yes.
maybe having them try some kind of experiment might make it more concrete, like this worked or this didn't.
Perhaps I can think about it. I think the biggest thing about all this is that they're feeling under intense pressure.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And I don't think they have the presence. I mean, the revelations are coming very quickly for them, right? Things are just hitting them very quickly. I don't think they have the presence. It would feel awkward for them to suddenly have the presence of mind to set up an experiment.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Quickly.
They're just like, but they are also like focused on this problem they're dealing, that they're like coming up with these, and everybody's contributing a viewpoint that helps them another piece, like it's a Jenga thing, right? Another one gets bold, another one gets bold. and at least now they have an idea of what the problem is that they're facing. So at least according to the current formulation of the problem as they've discovered it, right? And since the act just ended, it's the one they're going to use when they try to save the world, right? Is that we have a immortal guardian soul that lives inside of Solus's body, which used to belong to the soul that occupies Lomec's body, which used to be dead. And somehow they need to figure out a way to get that immortal soul back in the crystal to preserve it from collapsing and dragging everything into this massive metaphysical black hole, everything into it, this world, Earth, every other world that's connected to it metaphysically. Right, that's the problem they're trying to solve, which is a decent one. It's a fairly big threat. And it's about to happen. It's the other thing they figured out. Like, we're talking a day, hours. They don't have a lot of time to figure this out.
Okay, yeah, fair point.
I hope they do.
Yeah,
We shall see.
what happens. There's 5 chapters in Act 3. The very last one is an epilogue. So there's really like 4 story chapters, right? And we'll see what happens to them as they try to fix the problem, right?
Yep.
In fact, the name, the Act 3, like it's called Act 3, in which they try, then try again, and it's called the Book of Trials. So, haha, very funny. But there you go. But again, I'll go back to the question I asked earlier. Was it like a satisfying conclusion to this arc, this act?
There were some conclusatory things. That's not even a word, but you know what I mean. And then there are other ones that you opened up that you better answer.
Everything gets answered in the end.
I'm sure it does.
I'm curious what's still an open question, just to make sure that we haven't already answered it.
What?
What's an open question for you?
Oh, the soul thing. I want how that's going to work and how that's going to intertwine, like with all the seams that you pulled together.
Right. So the soul thing is the thing they just discovered and they have to solve. That's correct. Anything else? Any other open questions that you feel that are unresolved?
Well, just the biggest reveal.
Sure, there's one huge one coming up. Yeah,
The only one I'm waiting for.
there's one massive twist ahead of us. Bigger than every twist.
Yeah, I have a bunch of open questions, but I suspect you're going to explain them as part of the plot. So,
well, tell me. I mean, if it's something that I feel already has been answered, it's good for me to know that it hasn't been in your mind.
well, like, why is Garrett all spooky?
Okay, that will be answered.
What's going to happen if the crystal blows up? And
well, what's going to happen if the crystal blows up is what we just surmised, right? It becomes it destroys this world, it destroys Earth, it destroys a bunch of other worlds on the Soul Bridge along the way. It just pulls it metaphysical. It's a metaphysical black hole. It's not just a regular one.
Yeah, and why anybody even made such a dangerous thing?
That was answered by what Zacharias said, right? He said, some god stuck this thing into the world, right, to put these 2 souls that were trying to battle for ascension, right? So
okay.
he did answer that 99% of the way.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you pronounce that god's name again?
Oh, we're just calling him X. The spelling is XQZ, and the full pronunciation is something along the line of excuse.
Excuse me.
Dangerously close to the YouTuber.
Who?
XQC.
I don't know.
Yeah. The comics.
You should look on YouTube.
So what's any other open questions, Corey? Because usually
Those are the big ones that I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything that you've
already heard mine.
Yeah, anything you feel is not being resolved from Act 1?
Well,
No.
this is not really a plot point, but like, how come their mom is such a dick?
Yes.
She's like,
I
oh,
wonder, I wonder, Barack
she's
is
like, oh
like,
yeah, go figure that out,
Garrett-
kids.
I know. Yeah, either go figure it out or all will become.
She's consistent though. I mean, it's not like in the character isn't consistent. It's just
Yeah.
it's not a fantastical character. It's a very flawed sort of character.
Nicely done.
They're not the only ones in the world that have that might have a screwed
Yeah, I
up.
was gonna say, how could you even conceive of an imperfect mother?
I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's entirely plausible. It's just something I'm wondering about. That's all.
Yeah, well, it also ties to the fact that one of the things that I think is cool about it that Ariel picked up on back when she was still participating, right? When she said, "This is really cool because I'm not used to seeing elves that are kind of fucked up."
Right.
Like, fantasy, usually elves are like these mythical creatures that are very amazing in every way, and this is clearly not a very amazing person. She's amazing in some ways, but not so amazing on the emotional health part.
I also find it kind of interesting that you have like full interior thoughts and feelings for the characters, but like regarding the mom being a dick, it's just something that you kind of just make her brusque, but you don't really explore people's feelings about it.
Only once I did.
Yeah.
There's a point there where I said where Nael is like exposing their like, who are you kind of thing, right? There is that moment in the last chapter where it was like, who are you really?
Yeah,
like,
but it is an interesting choice though. But I mean, I think it's kind of neat. I don't think it's wrong, but
yep, it's all intentional, and there is, like I said, there is a final tying of loose ends that will happen on Sunday that perhaps will really put it all together for you. So bear with me on this. Henrielle's story is still not done in this book, even though it appears to have been.